shining down on the valley. Hope to be a fly fish till the day that I die. Spring has thawed out the long bitter winter. The water is clear and the skies are blue. I'm standing in the middle of the Beaver Kill River. Might even catch and release one or two. Well, some folks like horses, cats or a dog. Me, I like fishing with a rod and a fly. Yes, fishing is a favorite pastime of mine. If I couldn't do it, I think I would cry. Well, life is good when I'm wading a river. It gets even better when I cast a fly. If I catch a trout, it don't really matter. It's fun just to be here and give it a try. Trout is rising in the far eddy. I make false casts and take my aim.
Something is happening to your national forest. On the slopes above Overwitch Creek, in the headwaters of the Bitterroot River in western Montana, the trees were cut down, then the mountainsides collapsed. How did this happen? Was it the road building? Was it the clear cutting? Was it the deliberately set fires? Who did this? Was it the Forest Service? Was this done with your tax dollars? We met with the Bitterroot National Forest Supervisor, Steve Kelly. He declined a video interview, but did give us the official Forest Service incident summary, stating, "An intense rainstorm on June 25, 1992, caused severe erosion in the channels of 4 tributaries of Overwitch Creek, from the headwaters located in the Overwitch 2 burn to the confluence with Overwitch Creek. Sediment from the tributaries flowed directly into Overwitch Creek and through Painted Rocks Reservoir into the West Fork of the Bitterroot River. Preliminary findings indicate that a large percentage of the fish community in the lower 5 miles of Overwitch Creek may have been destroyed. According to forest watershed and soil specialists, clear cuts and roads did not cause the Overwitch incident or contribute significantly to the eroded material.
This is not a natural disaster. The Forest Service made a series of high-risk management decisions that led to this catastrophe. First, they built roads into this steep roadless area to get up into some of the last untouched forest for the purpose of cutting down the trees. Then they took the risk of clear-cutting the trees on these steep slopes right down to streamside. Then, when they burned the logging slash during hot, dry weather, wildfires escaped on 2 separate occasions. With 1,800 acres of burned forest, clear cuts to streamside, and roads dicing through steep drainages, the land had been put in a precarious situation.
There's 375,000 miles of roads on the national forest in the United States. That makes the Forest Service the #1 road building agency in the world. That's enough roads to go around the circumference of the earth 15 times. It's 1.5 times to the moon and back. It's 8.5 times the interstate highway system.
These burns that we see today are a result of the Forest Service. They were burning slash and clear cuts, and it got out of control. Until prompted, they were not mentioning the cause of the fire. If a member of the public were to start a brush fire in their backyard and it got onto national forest land, they would get a bill to pay for the firefighting and rehabilitation of the land. In this case, the taxpayer foots the bill. It takes at least 10,000 years to build up soil that can sustain a forest. So soil is not a renewable resource. 10,000 years of evolution of soil is heading downhill, along with boulders 3 feet across and trees 100 feet long. Suspended in the water, the clay, silt, and sand kept moving, hit the creek, and killed the fish. 100 miles downstream, the silt has reached Missoula. From the Clark Fork to the Columbia, it will reach the Pacific Ocean.
The Forest Service has broken the law here. The National Forest Management Act mandates that there are not any practices permitted on the national forest that change the water temperature, the chemical composition, the flow, the sediment load, or fish habitat. On every one of those points, the law has been broken.
Congressionally approved Forest Service mismanagement killed this area, and they continue doing this. This is not old forestry. This is 1980s, 1990s style forestry. I don't know if this is just the new forestry or the new and improved forestry, but it's really the same old forestry.
When the Forest Service punches roads like this into previously wild areas, they're no longer available for wilderness designation. Is that why the Forest Service is in such a road-building frenzy?
Suffering an 8-year drought here in Montana, a 1-inch rainstorm could have been a blessing, but it had a detrimental impact. It doesn't take a scientist to recognize that water will follow the path of least resistance. We are right in the middle of the catastrophe. There are eroded drainages on both sides of this, and yet this drainage is still intact. That's because it hasn't been under Forest Service management. This is indicative of what it would have been like with this 1-inch rainstorm on a natural forest. There would not have been a catastrophe.
What we see here today is horrifying to people. It seems hopeless, and folks feel helpless. But there is a wonderful alternative. It's called the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act. It's a bill proposed by the Alliance for the Wild Rockies, awaiting introduction in Congress by someone with vision and courage. It's a bioregional approach to ecosystem management, protection, and restoration of wild lands. It encompasses the remaining roadless areas in the Northern Rockies of Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, and adjacent parts of Oregon and Washington. This bill protects the region's remaining big wilderness complexes, as well as undeveloped corridors between them for migrating wildlife. Wildlife and their habitat don't know state political boundaries.
Overwich is not an isolated situation. The Forest Service is road building, clear cutting, and burning on every forest in the United States. When will this happen in your backyard? They sawed the right-of-way for the road, and then they came in and they sawed the trees out of the clear cut. And then when the fire escaped, they sawed the fire lines, and then came the sawing for the fire rehabilitation. Now they come in with saws to attempt to patch up the catastrophe. So basically, that's the Forest Service's main tool, the chainsaw. It seems to be their answer to all the needs of the forest. And they're still out here sawing.
The wild trout fisheries of Montana are world class. The habitat that supports that world-class fishery is on the national forests and the public lands for the most part. The same habitat that supports that fishery, that wild trout fishery, is also the habitat that supports elk, that provides security and cover for elk, that provides security and cover for wide-ranging low-density species such as lynx and fisher, wolverine, wolf, grizzly, black bear, mountain lion is also a threat in the logging and the road building that's going on. The reason that much of it is being destroyed is because of political pressure from politicians, from some of the politicians in the administration, some politicians in Congress, and also through actions of people who hold the real power in the Forest Service. I'm speaking of the chief, of some of the regional foresters, of the chiefs, some of the chief staff. For the most part, the people on the forests and the ranger districts don't hold the real power in the agency. But these people that I mentioned are breaking the laws that govern the administration of the national forest. And they're breaking the regulations and in many cases the forest plan standards through political pressure and coercion and that kind of thing. We all can do something about it. We can and should write to our congressional delegations and ask that an independent group of scientists be appointed to make a special investigation of the administration of the national forests in the northern Rockies. You can also support a bill that hasn't been introduced yet. It's in writing, that would protect all the remaining RODOS lands. I believe that bill is called the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act. It's up to all of us as Americans. We have a right and an obligation, actually a duty, to protect the natural resources of this nation from destruction.
There was a time, before the concrete started to flow, that the Snake River produced half of all the salmon in the Columbia River drainage. That's one of the major rivers in America. But the gauntlet of federal dams constructed to build the industry of the Northwest proved to be insurmountable, even for the king salmon, that mighty legendary fighter that holds such symbolic significance here. The confounding reality is we have the power to change the configuration and the operation of these dams. We have the power to save the salmon. The fight to save the salmon of the Northwest has national significance because, as in the case of the mighty bald eagle, it proves once again the tremendous importance of the Endangered Species Act. We must once again demonstrate the value of this important environmental law, and the salmon is the proper vehicle in which to do this. That creature that is the center of spiritual religion and a very significant part of this entire region must not be permitted to move into extinction. Your help is essential. Contact your congressman and urge them to see that the federal agencies, particularly the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bonneville Power Administration, become a part of the solution, and that they not resist change of a river system management that's going to make a museum piece out of the mighty salmon. There are two very important federal actions that must take place. First of all, the Army Corps of Engineers must be authorized to make the necessary structural changes, and OMB must be instructed to give BPA the necessary flexibility that it takes in their repayment schedule. Time is precious, ladies and gentlemen. Act now to save the salmon. Future generations will be in your debt.
The Salmon River no longer teems with Chinook salmon, and not one redfish returned to Redfish Lake last year, where once the bright vermilion of the sockeyes was a common sight. The great fish runs seem to have gone the way of the buffalo. As evening enfolds the rugged Sawtooth Mountains, an ancient custom is resurrected. For centuries, man has held candlelight vigils for long-forgotten reasons. And for centuries, the sockeye salmon have made the 900-mile journey home to the Stanley Basin. On this quiet summer evening, the two ancient traditions converge. A ritual watch has gathered on the banks of the Salmon River. Lookouts for what may be the last sockeye salmon in Idaho.
I just can't imagine no redfish in Redfish Lake, no salmon in Salmon, Idaho.
On April 2nd, 1991, the National Marine Fisheries Service proposed listing sockeye salmon as endangered. 2 months later, spring, summer, and fall Chinook salmon were added to the proposal as threatened species.
They're being listed because they're going away. The wild salmon in Idaho are in real bad trouble. The coho are extinct. The fall Chinook are down to less than 100. The spring and summer Chinook are down to a few hundred. We're down to the California condor stage with sockeye.
Near midnight on this August evening, the candlelight watch melts away, disappointed. But early the next morning comes the reward. For the first time in 2 years, a sockeye salmon returns from the ocean to its spawning grounds at Redfish Lake.
It was great to actually have a sockeye actually come back to our hatchery. It's been since 1989 that I've seen one, and this morning we got one 21 inches long. We think it's a male.
2 more males and 1 female eventually join the first pioneer. In this carefully controlled environment at Sawtooth Hatchery lie the sole adult survivors of a species that once colored the waters of Redfish Lake crimson when they returned to spawn in the fall.
It's a tremendous lesson for people to learn that gosh, here's a fish that lives in this harsh, alpine, sterile environment and migrates 950 miles to the ocean and goes almost to the coast of Japan and makes this huge circle in the ocean and then comes back to this river and comes up through all this commerce and industry and back to this pristine high mountain country. We can't lose that.
Arduous though that return journey may be, it's the trip to the ocean that is killing these fish. In the early part of this century, a sockeye or Chinook smolt would wash down the roaring runoff of the Snake and Columbia River system from Idaho to the ocean in about 8 days. This hasty journey allowed the small fish to avoid predators and permitted the extraordinary biological changes to take place that adapted from freshwater to saltwater. But as the West was settled, the tremendous force of the Columbia River system was looked upon as a source of power to be harnessed. Bonneville Dam was built in 1938. 7 more dams were added on the mainstream Columbia and Lower Snake by 1975. The Middle Snake added 3 more, the last being Hell's Canyon Dam, built in 1967. Now that same smolt can take from 20 to 90 days to reach the ocean, if it gets there at all.
Such a great number of them die during the outmigration process. And we talk about the dams, and people get real sensitive about the dams. It isn't necessarily the dams per se. It's the pools created by the dams and the system created by the dams of operating the river to maximize the hydroelectric system rather than to maximize the productivity of the fish. The answer is quite simply to make the river act like a river again.
70 to 90% of Idaho's salmon smolts never make it to the ocean. The number depends on water volume. These last 5 years of drought have had a devastating impact on salmon numbers. A good snowpack and a healthy spring runoff flushes the smolts through the reservoirs to Lower Granite Dam. Here, the Army Corps of Engineers has tried to transport the salmon in fish barges through the remaining dams. However, in low water years, the only way to ensure that the smolts flush through the slack water reservoirs is to reduce the volume in those reservoirs, thus creating the flow necessary to hasten the small fish on their way.
That's a matter of technology. It took technology to build the dams. And we've got people in the United States military that can figure out how to build a site on an airplane that will allow us to drop bombs into elevator shafts from 2 miles away, and we can sure as the devil figure out some way to get salmon back up a river and around a dam. It's a matter of having the commitment, making the commitment to do it, instead of to argue about whether it needs to be done.
What is the value of these fish? How do you put a price on a heritage? For years, salmon guide Bob Cole made his living on the Middle Fork of the Salmon River. His livelihood was tied up in these enormous fish. But for Bob Cole and other folks that remember the days of the big salmon runs, the intrinsic value of Idaho's salmon far outweighs the economic benefits.
I'm not sure that I'll ever see it again. I feel bad about it. Fishing's been a big thing all my life, ever since I was just a little kid. And to guide people that's never seen a fish that big, it's great to see them catch one of them. If they'd hook a fish, you never knew what was going to happen. They might bail off in the river, they might throw their pole in the river. It's just, it was great.
Bob guided out of Middle Fork Lodge, located in the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness. Here, along the Middle Fork of the Salmon River, lies pristine habitat, perfect for salmon spawning. The few remaining wild salmon return here in late summer to build nests in the stream bottom to lay their eggs. These nests are called redds.
See that swell on the water surface right ahead of us there? There's probably red in there, probably several.
Each summer at this time, Fish and Game biologist Terry Holubetz and his crew conduct what is called a red count. One way or another, either by helicopter, airplane, drift boat, or just plain walking along the tributaries, the many miles of Idaho's pristine spawning habitat is surveyed for salmon nests.
Here we have an area that the female has dug out and laid the eggs in about this area right here. And then she went upstream and dug farther up and covered up those eggs.
Although there are isolated pockets of habitat that could use some improvement, for the most part, biologists have found Idaho's wilderness rivers to be prime spawning grounds for wild salmon.
Okay, 3 reds so far. And this area in the next 100 meters or so usually has a lot of reds in it.
In late spring, the salmon smolts emerge from their gravel nests and the count begins again. Biologists use snorkeling gear to count the juveniles. At this point, prior to their migration to the ocean, salmon numbers are good. But from the time a juvenile fish leaves here to the time it arrives here is the danger zone for these smolts.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to produce a whole lot of fish, either in hatcheries or in pristine habitat like the whole Middle Fork and the Selway and all the designated wilderness, when they 80 or 90 or 95 or 98% of them never make it to the ocean.
The big salmon runs in Idaho are a part of our wildlife heritage. Anglers that grew up fishing for the salmon can no longer do so. Native Americans are being cheated out of their treaty rights. And folks like Bob Cole have only photos and memories to replace the feel of a huge salmon on their line.
I feel the same way as everybody else does. I think we need to do anything we can do, anything we have to do to get the fish back. It would really help the economy, there's no doubt about it. You get a lot of local people that would go up there and spend the night if they had salmon up there. There was so many of the people that were just going through Stanley Basin, be there for a day or two. They'd drive down the road and see somebody packing a 25-pound salmon up the shoulder of the road, and they'd burn the rubber and want to know who could take them fishing. And it was great.
Idaho's lost the buffalo, virtually eliminated the wolf. Caribou and grizzly bear teeter on the edge of extinction. The salmon has shown its determination to survive by its incredible 900-mile journey. Now it's up to man to match that fortitude.
And I think the nation is losing something. These fish go away, they're not going to come back.
really do. How was I to know someone be there fishing too? So I asked if I could fish my way upstream. He looked at me and smiled, said, "It's all right with me." With brookies, browns, and rainbows, and mayflies on the hatch. Give me brookies, browns, and rainbows, and one I hope to catch. Proceeded to start fishing with a tiny sulfur fly. Since they were hatching and they filled the sky, saw a steady riser behind a big rock, feeding one by one like the ticking of a clock. Brookies, browns, and rainbows, mayflies on the hatch. Give me brookies, browns, and rainbows, one I hope to catch. So I cast just above the trout that did rise. On the first cast, he took the fly, rod bent like a bow, reel was stringing out. I said to myself, man, this is a good trout. Fish began to flare, and he was released. He swam back to the pool with gentle ease. The day will live long.
You gotta see this.
In my memory.
I came home and told you that very thing, but you didn't say
Somewhere down the road.
I did too.
Did not.
I did too.
Your car and you went back to playing that stupid game.